Welcome back to the podcast where we talk about tennis and common sense, and we're all out of common sense. This is Tennis Unfiltered.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I'm James Gray of the iNewspaper and iNews.co.uk. I've got our resident tennis coach, Calvin Betton, with me at the moment. George Bellshaw is inbound, I am told. He is slave to the Great British Train Network, which of course means that we're lucky he's arriving at all. Never mind a few minutes late. So we'll get him in when he gets here. But in the meantime, Calvin and I will soldier on without him. We've got loads to talk about. This week we're going to talk about the Russians coming back to Wimbledon, which broke sort of as we were recording last week. We'll also talk about the return of Novak Djokovic in Monte Carlo, but the non-return of Rafael Nadal. Billie Jean King Cup qualifying is coming up. Garbine Muguruza is taking a break. Casper Ruud's winning a clay court 250. There's nothing new there, and plenty more. And we'll also, of course, and maybe we'll start, in fact, with your questions. Remember, if you want to ask a question, there's loads of ways you can do it. You can get in touch on Twitter at UnfilteredTennis. You can email us, as plenty of you have this week actually, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. I should also say a little shout out and a thank you to everyone who voted for us in the Sports Podcast Awards, which you will have heard me plugging and seen me plugging on social media and all sorts of things. Results, I think, are out in the next day or two, so we await eagerly to find out. Awards night, in fact, is April the 13th, I'm told, so we'll see how we got on. But even if we don't win, and it is a possibility, as always, I just want to say thank you to everyone who voted and who told other people on Twitter to vote and that sort of thing. It really was quite heartwarming, actually. And kind of with that in mind, and as a little thank you, and as you kind of become our habit, we're going to start with some listener questions. And we're going to start, appropriately enough, in Monte Carlo. Melanie B on Twitter. I don't know if it's that Melanie B. I assume it's not. I mean, I don't know how many Spice Girls we've got listening to the show, Calvin, but if we were going to have one, I reckon Mel B might be the kind of... I reckon she... I suppose you say Sporty Spice, maybe, but she's not that sporty, so... Don't know. Anyway, before I get down some sort of Spice Girl rabbit hole, Calvin, should there be any cause for concern about Cam Norrie's recent dip in form? Asked Mel B on Twitter. And what are your thoughts on Juan Martín Del Potro's comeback? Well, let's start with Norrie, because if we start with Del Potro, we could be here all day. She's of course referring to a bit of a tough start to the year. In Miami, he lost in the first round to Greg Barriere. He's just lost in the first round of Monte Carlo to Cerundolo. He even lost in the first round of the doubles, I see, with Ben Shelton. Calvin, what do you make of it all? I mean, it has been a pretty rotten run for him, hasn't it?
Yeah, but before that, he was on decent form, to be fair. I think he won one and made a final in South America before that. So, yeah, he's dropped form a bit. I think cause for concern is probably the wrong way to put it. I don't think he'll be over the moon with his form. And, you know, you would say that, although he's very decent on clay, you'd say it's probably his worst surface, just. So he's very, very good on hard courts, and he's decent on the grass. So, yeah, I think he's probably just not... He's probably playing slightly above his level or at the top of his level pre-Miami, and he's probably just sort of dropped down a bit now below what you'd expect his level to be. But, you know, Monte Carlo is Monte Carlo. You get some strange results purely because of its weird place in the calendar directly after Miami.
I think also with Cam, and what a lot of Brits or maybe British tennis fans who maybe only follow Cam or only kind of have an eye on Brits, I'm not saying that's what Melanie B is, but they will have got used to over the last year or two, and partly because of the kind of narrative that we tend to tell about Cam, which I think is a correct one, to his kind of consistency and being the kind of guy who doesn't lose first round and, you know, picking up at least 2 or 3 wins most weeks. So when he then comes out and starts losing first round to someone you never heard of, then it probably is a bit of a surprise, isn't it? Because he is someone we know is Mr. Consistent.
Yeah, but at the same time, he's the way that he plays, he's a guy who is capable of losing to players who play particularly well, because his strategy and his game plan is based on I'm going to put the ball in court mainly, and see if you can beat me. Because he's very fit, he's very fast around the court, he moves great, but when you play that type of game, you're open up to some guy just coming and swinging and hitting a few winners past you.
Do you think we've often talked about it with other people? Andy Murray, for example, we endlessly talk about how he needs to change his game style and add more weapons and that kind of thing. Do you think with Norrie just in a little bit of a flat spot, there is a case to be made that he should be looking to add more to his game? I know players are always looking to add more to their game, but given his very specific game style, should he be thinking, what's my plan B? What's my, in 2 years' time, the kind of player I want to look like? Or is this just the game he has to keep playing and hope that it kind of keeps serving him well?
I think it's the latter. I think at his age and his stage in his career, you kind of are what you are at that point. I think he's unlikely to be adding anything, particularly with his forehand grip. He's never going to flatten it out and hit through it and hit big balls. His backhand's probably his best shot. He serves okay. It's one of those you might be hoping to get 1 or 2% more, but I think in Cam's position, probably what you're hoping for is more just to be more consistent and week in, week out consistent, get your ranking to such a place that you just keep getting seeded higher in the slams and avoiding the top players in the world till later on in the slams, and that helps you get your ranking even higher, etc., etc., etc. But I don't think, once you get to, I think Cam is 27 or 28 now, you're not adding shots to your game at that. You get people who like to go, well, Nadal added a backhand drive, started adding an extra 20 mile an hour on his backhand when he was 34, which is just bullshit. That just never happened. And what they do is they kind of watch him play in the first round of the French Open, where he's absolutely battering somebody, and then watch him like streak off a few backhand winners because he's just letting his arms go a little bit, and they'll go, oh, what's this new shot that Nadal's got here? And it's just like,
his new shot is nonsense. Being 20% better than the bloke at the other end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when you're absolutely battering somebody, you're going to let your arm go a bit. And it's like the same thing as when people go like about Federer when he came back and he won those 3 slams and he beat Nadal. They go, he added a backhand drive. Like, no, he always had a backhand drive. He started hitting his backhand drive a bit more. Like he didn't add anything to his game. But yeah, at that age, look, you don't get people adding new shots to their game at past the age of sort of 25 or something like that.
And I guess that's the thing. Like I find the last year or so of Cam, and it's the inevitability of like professional sport and also I guess the media as well, is that he made that breakthrough. He first of all he became British #1, and we said, okay, well, you never got it past the 3rd round of Slam, so you sort of need to do that, don't you? And he said, yes, of course. Like, I'm going to change my calendar a bit. I'm going to play a few fewer tournaments. I'm going to try and peak for Grand Slams. And then he did do that, and he obviously made the semi-final of Wimbledon, but otherwise didn't really necessarily do that at Slams. So he said, well, what's the point in, not playing loads of tournaments, so I'm still going to cock up the Slams. I'm actually better if I'm playing quite a lot of tennis anyway. And then he goes back to playing that. And I'm not saying he's lost his way a bit by any stretch, because it's an overreaction to a couple of bad weeks, but I do think like he seems to have reacted to the changes in his life that have come with being a top 20, being a top 10 player, and maybe you might see him go back. I also wonder, and look, his coach Facundo is extremely highly regarded. I also wonder, and we'll talk a bit about coaching changes later, like whether there might be scope for a new voice in Cam Norrie's ear, because he's obviously been with Facu for as long as I can remember now, really. I mean, he only turned pro 6 years ago, but he's been with Facu most of that time. He's obviously worked a bit with James Trotman back in the UK, but I don't know. I wonder if there might be a scope for a different voice in his ear.
I wouldn't have thought we'd see any changes there. And look, we're talking about 2 or 3 weeks. Like, he lost to Rublev the week before the tournament before in
Indian Wells, yeah.
Indian Wells, which is no shame. Him and Rublev tend to go toe to toe. When they play each other, they win half and half each. And then he had a bad time in Miami, and then he's first clay court tournament. He's just gone out early here. But like I said before that, he was in pretty decent form. Is he still? There's only him and Sinner that have beaten Alcaraz this year, isn't there?
Yeah, sounds about right.
So and then the other match, he played Alcaraz twice. He lost to him once in 3 sets and beat him the other time. So I'm struggling to get on board with the, there's real cause for concern. And look, who is in form in the top 10 other than Alcaraz, Sinner, and Djokovic, who only plays half the tournaments? You look at the other players, and Ruud's playing like a drain, and I don't think last week really changes anything, being the rankings of the players that he beat. Rublev's not playing great at all. Tsitsipas is in no sort of form this year.
Medvedev's flying.
Medvedev, sorry, yeah, but you've got now. That's what I'm trying to say, though. You've got kind of the top. You've kind of got the top three players in the world who are all in very good form, and the others in the top 10 are in no sort of form. So I wouldn't think he's any different to that.
Quite. Well, there's your answer, Mel B. Should there be any cause for concern? No, don't think there should be, which is good news. And as you say, clay's not Cam's best surface, but he did go very well in South America. Albeit, again, it's a slightly weird tour, that little bit. But I'd be quite intrigued to see. I mean, that Monte Carlo result doesn't fill me with confidence, but I think we could potentially see Cam do some decent damage on the clay this year, and I think he would expect to.
Look, at any tournament that you go to, and I know Drapes beat one today, you do not want to be seeing an Argentinian on the first clay court tournament of a swing.
Yeah,
like they can play on clay courts.
Yeah. Let's move on to the other half of Melby's question, which is, what are your thoughts on Juan Martín del Potro's comeback? I mean, Calvin, I know you're ridiculously excited about it if it ever happens, but you're allowed 1 minute of waxing lyrical again.
I hope he does. I think it's been he's spoken about it, but I don't know whether he's thinking, if he's going to do it, I think it has to be right. I'm coming back to play. I'm coming back to join the tour. As much as I think the guy's brilliant, he's my favourite tennis player of the last 15 years, probably. As much as I think he's brilliant, I don't think he would do this. I don't want to see him just coming back and saying, I want to just play the US Open one more time, because I don't like that kind of thing. It takes a play. He'll get a wild card all day long because he's won it, but it takes a place of somebody. But I'd like to, and also you can't do that. He's just going to get battered if he does that. I think it has to be right. I'm fully fit again. I'm ready to compete on the tour at the highest level of the game, which is what he can do. He's a bit different from the others who've done that, though, because the way he plays, he just needs to be able to hit winners. He's not like, when you see some of the other guys coming back and they have to be moving and, it's an issue like that. If he's still got his forehand and his serve and he can move a little bit, he's still a threat to anybody on a hard court.
Let's move on to another returning legend of the game in Stan Wawrinka, because we had an email from Down Under, Darwin, Australia, from Mark Dr. Handsome, as he calls himself. He says, Calvin, absolutely love how brutally honest you are. State harsh but very accurate statements. Many podcasters are too afraid to say. Honestly, Calvin's going to need new headphones to fit around his enormous head. Keep that brutality yet accurate statements coming. Speaking of brutality, I have two questions for you. We'll come on to the second one later, but here's the first. Is anyone noticing that Stan the man, Wawrinka, is tremendously out of shape? I just watched the recent Elvis movie and his sweaty look resembles that of Elvis's final performance on stage under the lights, singing Unchained Melody. Is tennis well and truly past this somewhat of a legend? I mean, Calvin, you may think differently, but I've always looked at Stan Wawrinka and thought he could drop a few pounds, and it's never stopped him before. So is that just his natural body shape?
Yeah, I think that's harsh comparing him to late era Elvis. I mean, Christ, he's like, the guy was living on like deep fried ice cream and peanut butter sandwiches. Like, he's not. But look, he's a weird one, Stan. He's one of those people, and you get a lot of them. Kind of like, I guess, kind of Wayne Rooney was a bit like this as well. They're just big. Their natural body is big, but it's not necessarily out of shape. I think what you tend to find with that type of player is they, once they're not playing professional sport anymore, they quickly add weight.
Yeah.
But in fairness to Stan, and I've thought this, and I've seen him in person at tournaments, you look at him and he's there when he's playing, and he's like, he does sweat a lot. He's one of those guys who perspires quite a lot. And you think, geez, Stan's a bit out of shape. And then he goes to change his shirt, takes his top off, and it's like a washboard under there. And, it's just one of those strange body shapes, but he's not out of shape. I think, but, we do know that, as we said before, Stan, he does enjoy himself. He doesn't live the Spartan lifestyle like some of the tennis players do, which fair play to him. But he's definitely not out of shape. He's in excellent shape, and he always has been, to be fair.
And also, it should be noted, he is winning matches. He won 3 matches in Indian Wells. He beat Holger Rune in Indian Wells, who's played very well this year. He's in the second round in Monte Carlo. He beat Talon Griekspor in the first round, which doesn't sound like much, but Talon Griekspor is 14th in the race this year. Like, he's been playing quite a lot of decent tennis. So I think, I compare him to Luke Shaw, who, for football fans, the Manchester United left back, who obviously always gets teased for being fat. Now, he's by no means fat, and funnily enough, I interviewed his private chef a couple of years ago, and I sort of was pussyfooting around it and said, some people don't think Luke's in great nick, and he's like, some people call him fat, I'm aware of this, he's ripped, he's the most shredded man I've ever met, and obviously he has a private chef, which helps. I like to think that even I would be in decent nick, but yeah, it's one of those people who, they look sort of lumpy. I know you mean. Rooney's a good comparison, and yeah, probably once Stan stops playing tennis, he might balloon. I was at a boxing event last week, and I saw a guy who was world champion in the super middleweight division, which is not, that's 160 odd pounds, so not huge, and he would obviously make that weight regularly, and he only retired maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and my goodness, I mean, he'd struggle to make cruiserweight now. Like, he's really absolutely ballooned.
Yeah,
it's not pretty. No Spartan lifestyle for him. But I won't name him because that seems unfair. And you can just look at photos. I'm not wrong. Ben on email says, I have a question about league/team tennis, which seems to be big in France, Germany, Italy, and US college. It looks like an easy way to solve a lot of the problems of players not getting guaranteed income, sponsorship, and the after US Open dip. Could there be some sort of Champions League format copied from September to November in Europe? Also be interested to know a bit more about the level and money involved in the Euro leagues. Always enjoyed the pod. Cheers. Calvin, this is something you know a reasonable amount about.
Yeah, league tennis in Europe. I mean, US college tennis is a bit different. That's completely different. You have to go to one of the colleges, obviously. But league tennis in Europe is quite a big thing. Certainly in France, it's massive. Germany, it's very big. Italy, it's gotten very big. Where basically the clubs pay players to come and play for their clubs. I guess it's maybe somewhere between 8 and 12 matches per year that are all played in a season. So France is a strange one in that the top division in France, which is very, very high standard, in that all of the top French players will play in that, even if they're in the top 10 in the world, they will still turn out for their clubs in that. And the top division plays at a different time to the rest of the divisions. And Germany's kind of similar. The Bundesliga is very high level. You get a lot of the doubles players turning out and playing in that. Italian league. Most players in the top 500-600 in the world will try and get at least a French league or a German league, and that kind of thing, because they pay quite well and the standard is excellent. It's difficult the question about saying, could we have a Champions League? I don't think that's possible, just because of the alignment of when the seasons are and that kind of thing. And what you find, as I said there, is that players will try and find it's not like in football where you play for a team and that's who you play for throughout the year. In German and French leagues, a player will try and play some French league and they'll play for their club in that and they'll get paid, and then they'll try and play some German league at a different time of the season, and then maybe some Italian league and Dutch league and that kind of thing. So they'll go and try and get as much league tennis as their schedule allows, and as they can get in. So it's a bit difficult to say that. And also, I don't think the clubs would be that bothered about doing that, because they already have a pretty full schedule and players can't get anything else in. But the thing is, and also a question that I get asked about this, is why do we not have this type of thing in Britain? And the main reason is because we just don't have the culture in France, particularly in France, but also in Germany. Basically, what happens is on a Sunday afternoon, local people you go and watch your tennis team play, and you go to the tennis club and you have a few drinks there, you have some food there, and the tennis matches are on, and they get huge crowds in that. We just don't have that in Britain, and that's basically where the money comes from. That's where because you're getting big crowds there, you get sponsors in the clubs, local companies sponsor the clubs, and we just don't have that culture where in Britain, and this is not tennis's fault by any stretch, but it's not a thing wherein you go and watch your tennis team on a Sunday afternoon. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I guess it's the challenge. It comes back to the same challenge, which is for any sport that exists outside of football's sphere, which as people in the UK will know, and as is true in many countries in the world, football is an absolute behemoth. And I would suggest that England, or certainly England, possibly the UK, is maybe the most monocultural place when it comes to sport. Like, I'm trying to think of another country that is as like, if you think about the second biggest sport. Actually, here's a question for you, Calvin. A little bit of trivia. Do you know what the second biggest team sport in the UK is by participation?
Well, I know in the world it's basketball, so I assume it's basketball in the
Yeah,
UK.
it's also basketball, which surprised me. I interviewed the basketball league CEO the other day, and we were talking about it, and it genuinely shocked me that it was so big, and yet the basketball culture, like at the professional level, is actually quite minimal. But it's the same for all clubs, rugby union, cricket, golf, I guess, which is an individual sport, but they're always considered the traditional big sports in the UK, and the challenge is always getting people in through the door and interested in the grassroots level game, isn't it?
Yeah, and like you say, that we play so many sports in the UK, that's where the difficulty is. Where if you go to Germany and France, I mean, France has in certain places of France, they're quite into their rugby, but not nationwide. I guess that's similar to Britain, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's basically football and tennis.
Yeah.
And it tends to be what you tend to get is big cities, it's football, and in the other places, it's tennis.
In rural France, yeah.
And Germany's a bit different because Germany has a sports club culture.
Yeah.
Where the clubs, so if you're Bayern Munich, for example, you have the football team, you have the basketball team, you have the tennis team, and that kind of thing. So there's a big that each club has all the sports, and the people will support the club at all the sports. So it's a bit different there.
And it's the same in Spain, isn't it? Like Barcelona have about 9 different sporting teams, volleyball and all the rest of it. So yeah, it is a little bit different, but interesting. Yeah, and you say Luke plays a bit in Germany for a team over there.
He didn't play the last couple of years, but I understand he's playing this year. Right. I think he said. I don't know if Henry and Jules are playing for a team this year. I don't know. It's a bit strange because it's all done by kind of word of mouth. So, if a player, and I've had a few players who've gone, I wouldn't mind playing some German league, and it's quite difficult unless you have a contact to actually find a way into it. Yeah. But what you do get is you get some strange players who are like lower rank down, and they'll go, yeah, I know so and so asked me if I play for their team. So, and they end up getting paid quite a bit. But I know Luke is playing for the same team as his partner, Sam Verbeek, in German league. So I think that's later on in the year, though.
You mentioned Henry and Jules. When you came on to the call before we hit record, you were a little bit still down from yesterday. They made the final in Houston.
Yeah, it was a strange week because it rained basically for the whole week. So they played their first match on Monday, which was very early for a doubles match. They played it Monday and they won that, and then they didn't play again until 8 o'clock on Saturday night, their time. And because of that, they had a few singles players playing the doubles, so the little bits of tennis that they got played through the week obviously had to be singles, and then the doubles matches couldn't go on until the singles players had played singles, so you had a lot of withdrawals and that kind of thing. And then obviously there was Monte Carlo starting, so a lot of players were pulling out to get to Monte Carlo. So it seemed a strange one, but they won a close match in their semi and they lost a close match in the final. But because of the idiocy of TV rights, I didn't watch a single point being played of that because ATP 250s is the only doubles tennis that you can't watch anywhere in the world.
Should have flown you out for it, Calvin. You could have sat and watched the rain for a week. It would have been glorious.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that even if they're up to, I think, 54-5 in the world, that might be about right. And you mentioned that had they won the final, they would only have gone up another 2 or 3 places. I mean, that is going to be maybe the story of the next 6 months for them, isn't it? Just like clawing their way up a couple of places until they eventually start getting the automatic entry.
I mean, it's really difficult because when you're ranked at that ranking, you basically need to get into and win matches in the Masters and the Slams. Otherwise, you kind of get stuck there because, if you're winning 250s, you're not really moving anywhere. And the 250s are all you're really getting in. Maybe sneak the odd 500 if there's 2 in 1 week and that kind of thing. But as we're seeing again this week, they couldn't play Monaco. They won't be able to play. It's doubtful they'll be able to play Rome and Madrid just because there's a load of singles players who are playing it who, as we've discussed before, definitely will pull out of the tournament after they've played 1 or 2 matches.
Frustrating, I'm sure. And yeah, it's frustrating to watch as well. And I don't know if there's an easy fix, but I'm not sure there's much appetite for an easy fix, frankly. But yeah, we'll see. Right, we'll move on. I think we'll move on to Dominic Thiem because Rachel on email, and I'm sorry to be talking about Dominic Thiem before his biggest fan in the media, George Bellshaw, has joined us, but I'm hopeful that he might be inbound in the next couple of minutes, so we'll hopefully get him. But anyway, Rachel on email says, she's chiming in on Ostapenko's outfits from last week and says, my understanding is the outfits she wears are from her own clothing label, which doesn't surprise me at all because, as I said last week, I'm not sure anyone would sponsor her to wear them. So I'm fascinated to know how many. I mean, Ostapenko's a massive star in her own country, so maybe she sells loads of clothes there. But anyway, here's my question, says Rachel. In case you have a moment to discuss on the podcast, what is going on with Dominic Thiem and what will happen to him? Will he ever return to his former self? I'm a long-time fan of Thiem and I'm increasingly worried. Thank you very much for your entertaining and informative podcast. Thank you, Rachel, for your question. We were going to discuss Dominic Thiem anyway because he split with his coach, Nicolas Massu, this week after 4 years working with him, which was a little bit of a surprise. Massu helped him to obviously winning the US Open title, reaching the final of the French and the Australian, and a couple of Masters titles as well, so something of a surprise. Thiem said, what an incredible journey. It all started in early 2019. You came along with your incredible energy and extreme love for the sport. That's how we won the US Open and Indian Wells. We also reached the final of Australian Open, French Open, twice ATP finals. I think that shows we're an incredible team, but unfortunately everything has an end, and this came now. We have decided together that we will go different ways starting next week. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for this incredible and beautiful time, Nico. I wish you only the best, and our friendship will last together. Our friendship will last forever. Calvin, surprising to see him split with a coach when the problem seems to be made physical. I mean, you never know what's going on behind the scenes, obviously, but
yeah. I found it a weird one, yeah. Don't really know as to where you say, where does he go? I mean, he's a strange player because he has 2 main facets. That's the reason he got so high. One is that he can hit the ball phenomenally hard, and 2, he's probably the best mover in the game over the last 10 years around a tennis court. He still has the movement around the court. He hasn't injured, or if he has injured anything in his lower body, that's fully recovered. He still has his backhand, which is a great backhand, but as I keep saying, there's no more pointless weapon than a great backhand. But it's his forehand. He can't rip the forehand like he used to because he's had wrist problems. And that was basically the main reason why he won slams, or a slam, and made the final of others, because he could hit his forehand phenomenally heavy and phenomenally hard. And now he can't because of the grip change. He's getting to a stage where he's got quite a decent forehand now, but having had to change the grip, you're changing the mechanics of what made a shot so good. And it's unlikely that, I'd say, having watched tennis, I've not seen many players with a forehand as good as Dominic Thiem over the last few years. So it's unlikely that he'll suddenly develop a completely different but other forehand that is just as good as Dominic Thiem's forehand. So I'm dubious as to whether he gets back to Grand Slam winning. He might, because of everything else with experience and his movement and, the rest of it, and he might be able to find some way of hitting the forehand sort of 70-80% as well, then he might find his way back into the top 20. I'd be surprised if we see him back in the top 10 in the world.
Well, he's currently scraping his way back into the top 100. He did briefly make it earlier in the year, but then went on a losing streak of 5 matches in a row. Picked up 2 wins in Estoril last week, beat Ben Shelton in straight set, which was quite impressive, but then lost to Quentin Alice. He has just beaten Richard Gasquet 1-4 in the first round of Monte Carlo, which I feel like if you're Dominic Thiem and looking for easy wins, that must be an absolute dream of a result, and a draw to say the least. And as though he knew we were talking about Dominic Thiem, George Bellshaw has appeared, fresh from a British rail nightmare. George, how are you?
I'm good. I've had a bit of a disaster. I
How many times do you come on this podcast and your first words are, I've had a bit of a disaster? I assume you left your mic in Birmingham.
I haven't. No, I'm using it.
Oh,
I
great.
think.
Okay, good. Yeah,
I
I'm sure you
hope.
are.
I've set it up quite quickly, so hopefully
Impressive.
it sounds okay. Yeah, I arrived at Birmingham Moor Street at 2:15 to see my train was cancelled. So I asked one of the workers there if the next one was definitely coming. They said yes, that's fine. So I sat in the station, had a beer. I had 45 minutes. So I thought sit down nicely and have a Peroni. And I could see there was like a tiny queue of people kind of waiting at about 2:30. And I thought, this is all fine. No one's said anything weird. Anyway, I go walk through the scanner to get on my train, and they say, "Oh, where are you going?" I said, "To London." "Oh, turn around. There's a queue going back about
no.
bloody 2 miles down the road." So thank you very much to whoever was working there and didn't bother to inform me when I arrived there. I was very pleased with that. So then I got through the queue onto the next train, 5 people away, and then they shut it off. So I had to wait an extra hour for a train. So I apologise for being late, but it wasn't entirely all my fault for once.
It's all right. We've had a lovely time answering our listeners' questions. We've talked about... Well, I mean, you'll listen back to the first half, so you'll know what you've missed. Go on, George.
Well, I was going to say, one of the questions I read and I was like, I can't answer this. So I'm glad presumably Calvin's taken that one on the leagues around Europe. So
Yes.
I look forward to listening to that because I was interested to hear the answer.
Well, we were just talking about, because Rachel on email asked about Dominic Thiem and what will happen to him if he'll ever return to his former self. Calvin says he doesn't think he will make it back to the top 10. He is just about back in the top 100. I mean, he's obviously splitting with Massu is a bit of a surprise as well.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, it's obviously not going that well for Thiem. There's flashes where he gets to the odd quarterfinal. I think possibly one semi-final before.
Yeah, one semi-final in Antwerp and a quarterfinal.
Not that I'm following his career too closely off the top of my head. But yeah, he's not been the same player, has he? And it's particularly that forehand that's just not come anywhere close to what it was. And it's a shame, really. I mean, it was interesting seeing kind of Massu. The articles about him and Massu splitting up and what they actually achieved. I think you sometimes underestimate just how good Dominic Thiem was kind of towards the end. He's reaching finals of the US, obviously winning that one. Australia, a couple of French Open finals. He was, for me, he was comfortably the best player outside of Novak and Rafa at that time. And yeah, it was all been quite a disappointing fall from grace, really. So I'd love him to be back, as you well know, but I'm leaning towards Calvin of losing faith, even as a team believer.
I don't know Nicolas Massu very much, other than he was nicknamed El Vampiro, the vampire, when he was a player, and is obviously an Olympic gold medalist. But I'm guessing, given that Thiem's previous coach was Gunther, who is one of the hardest taskmasters in the game and incredibly intense, that Massu was perhaps of a similar kind of work ethic and attitude to things. So I'll be quite intrigued to see who Thiem ends up with next, really, because I'm not sure, whether he wants something different, or I sometimes wonder when you get guys who've had these big injuries and had to make these, as Calvin discussed, like specific technical changes. It's like, I need someone who gets this, like someone who's got specific experience of doing this. And I remember when Tiger Woods had back surgery that no one had ever had and then become a professional golfer again. He sacked his coach because he was like, well, what's the point? Like, he doesn't have a clue what's going on in my body. And yet I think he actually didn't get another coach because he was like, no one does, no one's ever done this. And I sometimes think the same with Murray. The other thing, and I was thinking about Andy Murray in this particular circumstance, is whether Massu's looked at it and gone, your expectations are unrealistic and we can't, we're not going to achieve the same things here. We can't see ourselves going on the same pathway. And I sometimes wonder whether that happened a couple of times with Murray in recent months, where, a coach has come in, worked with him for a bit, and Murray's gone, right, how are we going to get back to world number one? And the coach has gone, well, we're not, so I'm not going to work with you, because like, if we're not working towards the same realistic goal, then it's not necessarily going to work. Anyway, we await with interest to see exactly what goes on with Dominic Thiem going forward. And as I say, he's into the next round in Monte Carlo. So that, in the short term, a positive. I've got another question from Dr. Handsome, who asked a question earlier, and I've got a second
I didn't realise I'd written in this week.
Yeah, very good, very good. He says, what do you believe is the main factor with women and their inconsistency? He specifically means in tennis, not just generally. I always tell my mates, if you bet on tennis, go for the women's. Last year I put $1,000. I won $1,000 putting $10 on Rybakina at Wimbledon. This would never happen in the men's game. Well, since Goran Ivanisevic. Thoughts? I mean, he is right that Goran Ivanisevic has been the biggest prize winner of the 21st century of a Grand Slam. I'm trying to think who the next biggest surprise winner of a Grand Slam has been. I don't know if
Ivanisevic was still like a good player before that as well.
Yeah, but he was a wild card, wasn't he?
It was, yeah, but like I swear he'd been like world number 2 before that, hadn't he? Might be wrong.
He had been world number 2, yeah. I think Agassi winning the US Open in '94 was very much out of the blue as well. I think he was well down the rankings at that stage.
Trying to think 21st century if there's anyone who has kind of been of that magnitude or even close, really.
The strange period from 2000 to 2005-ish would have had a few.
Gaston Gaudio, Thomas Johansson.
Yeah, Gaudio was a big one, yeah.
But Wawrinka's first slam was quite a big surprise. I mean, around then he'd been kind of top 20 before then, kind of 2014. I know in hindsight it doesn't look like that big a surprise, but that at the time I think was, even though he'd like shown quite good signs of improving, that was in the height of the Big Four stronghold and didn't really feel like anyone else could come through. So that probably was up.
But he was still the number 8 seed.
But I know, but I think it's just the context of how good those guys were that anyone who was outside of them winning it, no one did win. You had Cilic, I guess, 2014. I
was thinking about Cilic, well. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because you sort of have to take yourself back. But I'm not sure.
This hasn't always been the case in the women's game, though. If you go back to, even back to sort of early Williams era. But before that, in the sort of Graf, Celes, Sanchez Vicario, it was always one of those three, or Conchita Martinez, and then Navratilova. It's not like you can say, women's tennis has always been chaotic. The specific reason I think that it's the main reason is because the women play such a low percentage tennis that basically so many of them just absolutely leather every ball, and there isn't really any tactics in the women's game. It's just who strikes the ball better on the day. And that's, if you look at it, what we've had this year, where basically the major tournaments in the final, you've had Rybakina and Sabalenka, who both play very similar. They both leather every single ball, and it's whoever wins on the day. And you get quite a few of those down the rankings. And if you look just at Raducanu's slam win, it was basically Emma just playing her above her mean level, and just every match she was basically on big points. She was just swinging and making balls, and you just get more of that in the women's game than you do in the men's.
I think if I were to launch another kind of slight defense of the women's game, I think you do get these transitional periods between kind of people like Serena and kind of a next period, and this has gone on a little bit longer. But in fairness, a few of the players who definitely it felt like were going to dominate the women's game, I'm talking specifically Barty and Osaka, have both left the game for different reasons. So, that level of, and, there were other factors kind of kicking in there, but they were players of the quality to kind of really sit at the top and dominate Grand Slams and do really well. So if you kind of throw Swiatek into the mix of that, you could easily have had a very, very strong big three if things had panned out slightly differently. So, it's not a perfect defence by any means, but I do think that is quite a significant factor, and one that's happened less in the men's game. I think Del Potro is probably the only real star male player I can think of in the last 10, 15 years who, really possibly could have been that world number 1, 2, 3 who lost his way after winning a first Grand Slam, not through no fault of his own. And it just happened there were 4 other pretty good guys kicking around anyway.
Tricky. Right, shall we move on? Unless anyone has more defense. I mean, I would say, and this is like maybe a 5 or 10%er, that 3 sets rather than 5 also changes things a bit. I think that makes it higher variance because you only have to play 2 good sets of tennis to knock out. Think about if Novak Djokovic had lost every time he. I know we have our opinions on Novak Djokovic going 2 sets down in a Grand Slam, but think about the number of times he has gone 2 sets down in a Grand Slam, even in the last 2 years. Yeah, I think that makes a slight difference, Calvin.
I think on both your points there. Firstly, on George's about Del Potro, I've said before that I think Del Potro would have made a difference as well, not just in how many he won. I don't think he'd have won another 9 or 10 slams, but what he was pre-injury was he was probably the only player who could regularly beat the other 4 in majors over best of 5. So even if he didn't go on to win them, he would have been an extra player who could have knocked some of them out. And I'm absolutely certain that the numbers, we love to talk about the numbers of slams won, how many all of the big 3 have won. I'm certain that those numbers would be different one way or another if Del Potro was around. They might all have the same, but I don't think they'd have been distributed in the same way, if that makes sense. On your point, James, there, I don't think it's necessarily a perfect science, though, because it mentally changes. It's not like, say, you go and imagine how many times Djokovic would have been knocked out if he was best of 3, because he just kind of knows he's got another set left at the end of it. So I think that it's psychological, a bit of that. What I find alarming about the women's, and there is a valid point that best of 5 would have made a difference. What I find alarming about the women's game is how many of the top players lose so easily in straight sets at these tournaments. I think it was it the Australian Open where, I don't know whether it's Kasatkina, who was, one of the top 7 or 8 favourites, just went down like 1-1 in the first round or something.
She lost to Harriet Dart in the first round.
Yeah, things like that. And there just other players. You see like seeded players going down like so easily that I think it can only be that basically a lot of the female players, they come out and they just absolutely rinse the ball. And some days it goes in, some days it doesn't.
Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of the iNewspaper and inews.co.uk. I've got Calvin Betton, our resident tennis coach, and for the whole of the second half, George Bellshaw has made it through wind, rain and train to be with us this evening. We missed it last week because it was a breaking story and we didn't have time to react, but Wimbledon have decided they will allow Russian and Belarusian players to compete at the championships this summer, as long as they sign a declaration of neutrality before doing so. Represents a U-turn on last year's blanket ban on players from the 2 countries playing in any events in the UK on account of the illegal invasion of Ukraine. The professional tours responded with fines and threat of expulsion, and left British tennis with little choice but to row back on its ban. Ian Hewitt, the chairman of the All England Club, said, "We continue to condemn totally Russia's illegal invasion and our wholehearted support remains with the people of Ukraine. This was an incredibly difficult decision, not taken lightly or without a great deal of consideration for those who will be impacted. It's our view, considering all factors, that these are the most appropriate arrangements for this year. We're thankful for the government's support as we and our fellow tennis stakeholder bodies have navigated this complex matter and agreed on conditions we believe are workable. If circumstances change materially between now and the commencement of the championships, we will consider and respond accordingly." Also key to note that ranking points have been restored to grass court events this summer, but that the ban will not lift for the futures events in Nottingham later this month. I know that won't affect many people, but I know several people who it does. So from Surbiton onwards, Russians and Belarusians back in grass court events. Calvin, setting aside the futures events, which, as I say, are kind of fringe, but I know overall that's music to your ears, isn't it, to let Russians and Belarusians back in?
Yeah, I think it's the only way of doing it. It was, as I've said many times on this podcast, I thought it was ridiculous that they banned them. It was a remarkable show of exceptionalism from the All England Club, hand forced by the government, I must say. And then the LTA was dragged into it, and it's ended up doing no good whatsoever. It's affected badly. A lot of British players suffered for it, because all the British players who did well at Wimbledon last year got nothing from it. There's certain players, like, for example, I don't know the exact numbers, but such as Liam Brodie, I think might have been in the top 100 if he'd have if he would have got the points for it, and then the financial implications of that, because for such as Broads and similar players, that would have guaranteed them first round into all the slams, which is about 50 grand each. And this is obviously not the main issue we should be discussing when going over the war and that kind of thing, but it just wasn't thought through. It was just a ridiculous move, and I don't mean to say I told you so, but I said at the start they're going to take it off next year. 100%. It was always going to come off, because when do they think this war's going to end? Like, if it ever ends, we could look at an Israel-Palestine situation. And so what are you going to do? Just tell the players that they can't play this one tournament? Something had to give one way or the other. Wimbledon would have come an exhibition event, or they were going to have to let them back in, and they were never going to let it become an exhibition event.
They've put themselves in such a difficult situation as well. And as I mentioned in that quote, if circumstances change materially between now and the commencement of the championships, we will consider and respond accordingly. Now, what that means, who knows? Like, how there can be an escalation, I don't know. But they're obviously making it open-ended to give them wiggle room later on if they need it. But when we asked, I can't remember who it was, I had a call with Sally Bolton, who's the chief exec of the All England, and someone said, I think it was Mike from the Mail actually, said, what's changed? There's nothing has technically changed in Ukraine. What's changed that's made you make this decision? And the answer was essentially, well, the rest of the tennis tour has spent a year letting Russians and Belarusians play neutrally, and it's been okay. So we sort of thought we'd fall into line. George, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Calvin's allowed to say he told us so, to be fair, even it was. You called this one pretty well from the start. I think me and James were sympathetic to the difficulties of the decision at the time, but
well, I flip-flopped. I had a full Tory government U-turn. I was initially thought they had to be banned, and then I was on the fence, and then I went with public opinion.
Yeah, we're swayers, James. We go with the wind.
Very much so.
But yeah, I do still have degrees of sympathy with them last year, but it felt untenable as a position to carry on doing that, particularly in light of what the rest of the tour's been doing the rest of the time. And it's very easy to say, oh, what's changed? Everyone else has been doing it, but that is quite a big thing, to be honest. When they made the decision, they were making it pretty early on, and arguably too early. You could say they could have seen how the land kind of lay at that stage, but there were definitely other factors. So I can understand it from last year, but it couldn't have carried on. And I actually read, the sentence you're saying about, the thing you said about escalating there, James. I'd almost read it the other way around, as actually, if by some miracle the war was over by then, they could maybe play under the Russian flag. I thought they were giving leeway that way. So
you're clearly much more of an optimist than I am. Yeah.
But it's good to have them back, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, as Calvin says, tennis is not the most important thing in this, but this is a tennis podcast, and we don't want people like Medvedev and Sabalenka not to be able to play the biggest events. That's a good thing, and it is good that the players are going to have their ranking points back. Yeah. And I think if we say anything else about the war, we're just going to go over old ground. But yeah, Calvin can definitely have his cookie for being correct.
Well, I'm just going to say one thing about it, because I think it's an interesting wrinkle in this whole story. And people will know that in my job I cover the Olympics beat as well. And the UK government have been leading this charge to make sure that Russians and Belarusians are not let into the Olympics in Paris next year. At the moment, the IOC, who are led by Thomas Bach, people may or may not know, are planning to find a way to let them back in as neutral athletes, having previously banned them, and are advising federations to start letting them in as well, because, as people know, they've been full-stop banned from a number of different sports. And what I don't understand is how the government can, on one hand, be like writing letters on behalf of 35 different countries telling the IOC to ban Russians and Belarusians, and on the other hand, are in support of this decision to lift the ban on Russians and Belarusians, like actively lift it rather than just maintain a status quo. Now, I know the reason is that the professional tours have said, well, we'll just kick you off, and then that would have caused huge damage, and they would be the government who neutered British tennis, and there's an election coming up. But shouldn't, therefore, the UK government be writing to the ATP and WTA saying you should be banning tennis players who are Russian and Belarusian. I've put this to a number of different people within the whole process, and they know it's an inconsistency, and no one has had a satisfactory answer for me. But unfortunately, it's not that sexy a piece of news, but it is hypocrisy at the heart of it, so I wanted to bring it up. But, as you say, George, from a tennis perspective, it's pretty mouth-watering, actually, he says, as catching a frog in his throat. We've got Daniil Medvedev, who, I mean, we all said he couldn't play on clay, and then it turns out he could play on clay. Well, he said he couldn't play on clay, and it turned out he could play on clay. We all said he couldn't play on grass, but actually, the grass tournaments he did play last year, he went pretty bloody well, because he maxed out his schedule, to kind of make up for the fact that he wasn't going to play Wimbledon, and he made the final in Rosmalen, made the final in Halle. I think it could be pretty fascinating to have Medvedev, Djokovic, and a few others, fully fit and firing at Wimbledon this year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's a good player, and he's got a good serve. And Calvin's favourite quote is "a grass court isn't a grass court these days." And Medvedev's pretty bloody good on a hard court, so I'd back him much more at Wimbledon than I would on the clay. I still, at this moment in time, I still find it very, very hard to see anyone stopping Djokovic again. He just has looked a cut above. Even in the matches where he's got slightly tricky, it's in those matches where I question Novak is just making it tricky for the sake of there being an interesting match at the tournament rather than seriously believing he's ever going to lose. I mean, he's comfortably the favourite, but yeah, he can go far, Medvedev. I think it could be quite interesting in terms of his schedule and what he plays this year. I think there'd be quite an interesting bet on will Medvedev make more points on the grass courts this year than he did last year. If he cuts down one event and has a surprise early exit at Wimbledon, he might actually end up with fewer points. But there we go. That's probably a nerdy question to pose to people.
I mean, also because of the way the ranking points work, he's actually only defending something like 300 points on the grass, maybe, or 400 points, and he only has to win a couple of rounds in Wimbledon to make that up. So, yes, I take your point. It's possible. But you did mention Novak Djokovic, which is a nice segue into Monte Carlo, which we alluded to at the top of the show because it was relevant. But in some ways, Monte Carlo this week is as notable for who isn't there as for who is. Novak Djokovic is making his return to the tour, but the three big withdrawals due to injury, and there were more, Rafa Nadal, Carlos Alcaraz, and Felix Auger-Aliassime. Obviously, two of those are maybe slightly more high profile, but the Alcaraz one is particularly a victim of the Sunshine Double. We've got to start questioning, Calvin, how sensible it is to have a Clay Masters straight off the back of those two tournaments in the US.
Yeah, it's now getting the stage where it's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense on any level. I don't get why, on the premise that it's a Masters, I don't get why you wouldn't move it round. I mean, the only argument is that you then have three Masters in such a short space of time, which is a problem for the players who can't play, who can't get in because of their ranking. You're then looking at basically, well, you're already looking at 3 out of the next 6 weeks where they can't play a tournament anyway. But they really should have another clay court tournament in Europe before added in before the Monte Carlo Masters.
There's something, I don't know, it's not about the journalists, but there is something about Monte Carlo where it's known as a tournament to almost open the clay season, and kind of you have quite a lot of people come there, do big round tables with a lot of the biggest players, and they kind of treat it as that start of a new chapter of the season where they're trying to build it up. So I think from a kind of storytelling perspective, there is something quite nice about having a big clay court event quite early into it, where you can really kind of set the narrative for the next part of the season. But
yeah, but if no one's there, George, what kind of narrative does that?
But they have typically been there over the years. I would say. I haven't got the figures, but over the years they have been there.
It's also, I mean, just the weather point of view. It's probably the most scenic tournament in the world, and we seem to it's like pisses it down like half the time every week. It's just like have it a couple of weeks later when it's really nice there.
Yeah, I mean the whole kind of thing. When you look at the weather in particular, I do think we could. The Australia. George, I know you have done this. You've done the maths on this, and it's very complicated. But like the Australian Open, I know it has to be during school holidays, but it's invariably too hot. Albeit this year it wasn't that much. The Miami and Indian Wells tournaments could certainly be held a bit later in the year as well. Although then it would get pretty hot. And then if
kill Indian Wells,
or just kill Indian Wells, which is a much better shout. And then you move the clay court season 1 or 2 weeks later. You move the grass court season 1 or 2 weeks later, so you get more of it in school holidays in the UK. You move the American hard court swing a bit later, so the US Open is like all in September, which is fine because it's roasting hot in New York anyway, and no one minds. But anyway, it's literally never going to happen, and there's no point in me like exerting blood pressure about it. But it is damaging not to have like Alcaraz and Nadal there, isn't it? And I suspect we're probably only going to see Nadal once, maybe twice before the French Open.
Yeah, I have to say I was a little bit surprised he hasn't made it yet. He kind of said he just wasn't ready to compete.
Well, if he's not fit, he's not fit.
Fit. I know, but normally he kind of does his magic trick, doesn't he, where he kind of gets to the end of Australia. I do think there is a bit of a, I'm picturing Homer Simpson with the bells ringing on the end is nice sort of thing. It does just feel gradually worse every year. It'll be interesting to see how much he plays. I think there's something, as much as we're kind of saying it's a bad time for Monte Carlo. Nadal not being there is kind of one of the stories of this year, isn't it? How ready is he going to be? Is this his last shot? Can he conjure something out of his pocket again? Him not being there actually doesn't change that much of the kind of lead-in story for the French Open for me. Alcaraz is the more disappointing one, really, and it's becoming a bit of a theme over the last 6 months, isn't he? That he's kind of in and out a bit with a few kind of niggles, and he's not the only one, and we've said this before, he's still very young, and other comparable people of his age, we only have to look at the British ones, Draper and Raducanu, they can't stay fit either. But the tour really needs Alcaraz to be there at all the Masters events at the minute, there at all the Grand Slams, going deep. It's important we have this crossover period where we get as many matches with him and Novak and Rafa, if Rafa does make it back to any sort of level like we're hoping. So I think he's the really big miss for me from this one.
But it also needs, tennis as a sport needs, as we talk a lot about how rivalries create sport, and it needs the rivalry to start kicking in, because for the last 12 months, Alcaraz and Djokovic have been the two best players in the world, and I think they've played once, which is not, it's not enough. For one reason or another, tennis needs to find a way of getting, right, you two are going to have to play a lot more. Because Djokovic isn't going to have loads of time left, by the way. We might get at this level that he's playing at, we might get this year and at a push next year. But in 2025, he's not going to be this version of Djokovic. And this version of Djokovic is not the best version of Djokovic. But, we can't just have them. And then you throw into the mix, Nadal, we want a French Open or the clay court tournaments. Nadal's still in the mix. We need him there. We need Medvedev playing well on the clay or on the hard courts, and Sinner as well coming to the fore. We need Zverev back into the form that he was in this time last year. But there's not enough of the big rivalries. There's not enough big matches. We've had very good matches this year. There's not been enough big matches to say that we're halfway through April at the minute.
Agreed. Big match potentially Djokovic Sinner in the quarterfinals. George, how much do you expect Djokovic to walk through this? Or we have seen him get, he does get rusty, doesn't he, when he's been away from tennis for a while, and Sinner's bang in form.
Yeah, Monte Carlo has been a bit of a funny tournament for Djokovic over the years.
Ask that question, yeah.
I think he's won it twice off the top of my head, but the times he won it were hugely significant wins. Nadal had never lost in this tournament, basically. This was about as strong as it got kind of outside the French Open, and, Djokovic sort of playing at home in the kind of place where he lives. Those wins were really quite significant and felt like Novak was the guy who could take it to Rafa on clay like no one had during his whole career. But those kind of wins aside, it hasn't always gone that well. He's had kind of quite a lot of up and down results, really. I can't really think when Novak last won this tournament, actually.
2015, he last won this
Yeah,
tournament.
it's a while ago.
And since then, he hasn't won more than 2 matches in a row. And the guys who've beaten him include Yuri Vesely, David Goffin, Dominic Thiem, Daniil Medvedev, Daniel Evans, and Alejandro Davidovich Fokina. And I seem to remember that Fokina match a bit weird. It was incredibly windy, I think, and he lost in 3.
And that 2015 version of Djokovic was arguably as good a version of Djokovic as there had been. I think that's the year he fell short to Wawrinka in the final, but that he was on to win kind of all 4 at once then, and then obviously did it the next year, but was kind of dropping off by the end of that.
And then
half.
injury.
He was really bloody good there. It's an interesting tournament. It's not one he'll take for granted. The conditions are really windy out there. It's quite a difficult tournament to play in, obviously. Kind of waterside. I wouldn't take it for granted. Sinner's definitely a guy who can cause him problems on there. And as you say, then when you've not played for a while, you lose that little bit of match sharpness. Djokovic is pretty good at coming back in and still looking pretty decent, but I wouldn't say he's maybe like as good as Federer was back in the day, where didn't feel like Federer needed to play for months and he could just come in and kind of waltz away with it. So it does take a little bit of warming into comparatively, I'd say.
One man who's not warmed into the clay court particularly well is Andy Murray, who we can talk about because he is already out of Monte Carlo. He lost to Alex de Minaur 1 and 3. Simon Cambers is out there freelancing for the Herald and spoke to him afterwards. Murray said, "It was awful. Nothing was good about it. I don't know exactly why that was. I didn't play a great match in Miami, and this was worse than that. I didn't do anything well, didn't serve well, return well, forehands, backhand, shot selection. It's one of the worst I've played in my career, probably. I had a match like that last year in Doha against Bautista Agut. That was pretty bad, and maybe 1 or 2 others in my career. But in terms of how I felt on the court, it was right up there, just across the board. I've been feeling good with my body the last 10 days or so, considering we've not played much on the clay. I was feeling good, actually moving pretty well in practice, so I was optimistic, but it was really tough." Calvin, do you think Murray should be playing on the clay full stop?
If his body's fine, then yeah, because his aim is, if he's serious in what he says he's serious about, which I entirely believe him, that he wants to get back to a ranking where he's getting seeded for the slams. He's not going to win the French Open, but he needs to get ranking points. And there's 3 Masters, and as we discussed earlier on, the big points are in the Masters, and the Masters and the slams. So if he wants to have a hope of getting seeded at Wimbledon and the US Open, he's got to play the clay. And if his body is fine, it's not going to affect him badly for the grass and the hard courts. There's no reason why he wouldn't play the clay. He's just not playing well. He's had 2 tournaments, but I was reading the quotes just now, and they're talking about, we always have this debate now, like, what's going to happen here? Is this the end? And all that. What did he make in Indian Wells? Didn't he make last 16 or something? He had a decent run, didn't he?
Lost to Draper around 32, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's
Won
had
2 matches. Yeah.
He's had a decent enough year this year. If he wants to get seeded for the slams, so he's got to be top 36 in the world, top 32 in the world, sorry. He's going to have to play the clay court tournaments, but I think also, I don't know whether he puts pressure on himself, but I think everyone else puts pressure on him to go, he's lost another match there, but, I think he's had a decent year.
Yeah, it just feels like it's hit a little bit of a struggle in the last 2 tournaments, but yeah, I mean, on the whole, it's been a very good year. I have been quite surprised by these 2 results, really. I mean, Lajovic on a hard court, to lose that is disappointing, really, when you've been to a final in, was it Qatar, against Medvedev, and then, losing to Draper, there's kind of no shame. We think he's a very high-level player, but that was a disappointing result. And then to kind of back that up with getting hammered, really. There's no 2 ways about it. It's an incredibly one-sided scoreline against a guy who is good, but is a guy Murray will fancy himself against. It's not like de Minaur's outright brilliant on the clay. He doesn't have the weapons come through. You'd expect Murray to be holding serve, a lot more than he has done today, basically. So, yeah, it's too early to get too worried, and on the balance of things, the year's been good. But as Calvin says, he needs to get some points out of these tournaments and kind of move up the rankings. And it felt a not too bad draw for me to give it a go, as much as people want to dress it up as a kind of top 15 seed. If you're going to pick any of the seeds in the top 15 on clay, I think de Minaur would be probably the one I'd pick, to be honest.
Sorry, I was getting distracted reading ahead in our running order, so I just completely went to sleep.
I thought you were just enjoying my points so much that you just were.
I mean, I was
one
simultaneously listening to your dulcet tones, but I was also getting distracted. Let's move on from Monte Carlo, I think, because we'll talk lots about it next week as well once it's happened, which I think is the best way to do things. There is some women's tennis going on this week. It's Billie Jean King Cup qualifiers this week, which means tennis is coming home, by which I mean it's going to Coventry, of course. Where else? The home of tennis in the Midlands, kind of. GB taking on France. That is, of course, a GB team without Emma Raducanu. It's the same group that went to the finals in Glasgow. So that's Dart, Watson, Bolter, and then the doubles pair of Barnett and Nichols. George, looks like a pretty tough draw, I would suggest, for GB against France, isn't it?
Yeah, I struggle to see them coming through, to be honest. I mean, you never know, home crowd, and these players have pulled out some good results in the past, and the finals last year, you'd have to say, was quite a success, because I really didn't see them winning a match full stop. No. So, people like Bolter and Dart and others have stepped up in this one, and Watson as well. They've all stepped up in the past and kind of come up with big wins. But yeah, it's disappointing not to have Raducanu, isn't it? That's the bottom line. She's the big star of the women's game at the minute, and you want her playing these ties. That's not a dig at her. It's just kind of a reality that you want your biggest names playing at home, and she also gives us the best chance of winning bigger matches. I don't think this is unwinnable, but
the French team, for people who haven't been keeping up with this, is Caroline Garcia, Alizé Cornet, Clara Burrell, and Kristina Mladenovic, who you would expect to see in the doubles. I mean,
maybe it is unwinnable, actually.
I was going to say,
reading.
Garcia, I think, has won Grand Slam titles in the doubles, as has Mladenovic, I would like to say.
Yeah, Mladenovic is a good doubles player.
Yeah,
former world number one.
That's to see, and Alizé Cornet just pulls it out of the bag, and she will absolutely. I mean, of all the players to play, Alizé Cornet will absolutely love having 4,000 Brits screaming against her in Coventry. She will live for that. She loves those occasions. If ever there was a big game player, in my opinion, it's Alizé Cornet, Calvin.
James slightly overselling how aggressive the British Fed Cup crowd are there with their chants of "We hope we will win."
Yeah. No, it's I believe that we will win.
That's the one. Yeah, it's hardly like Naples on on a big Sunday night, is
the
it?
Batzalt.
Yeah. I think that the interesting storyline really is that obviously Emma Raducanu's British number one isn't playing, and British number two just hasn't been selected.
So that's Jodie Burridge, is that right?
Yeah, at 108, and she's quite away British number one. She's 30 places above the next one, and she's 40 places above Katie Bolter, who's in there. So,
I mean, I guess there's presumably, I mean, I'm guessing, and I wouldn't speak for Anne Kiothvong. I mean, I could probably ask her, I suppose, but I'm guessing there's an element of trying to have some consistency. That group of five, I mean, for whatever reason, worked well together in Glasgow. But yeah, I mean, Jodie's been going well as well. She won a title last week in France, I think.
Yeah, she won a title. Also, Francesca Jones made the semi-final of a WTA event last week.
Yeah, some people will have heard about Fran Jones before. She's well known. She's born with a genetic deformity that means I think she only has 3 fingers on her right hand. I think I'm right in saying.
I know Fran fairly well. She's from Yorkshire.
Yeah,
and a friend of mine used to coach her. So
yeah, she's missing 1 finger in each hand and missing 3 toes as well. That's to get it right. She has ectrodactyly ectodermal dysplasia. But quite apart from that, she's a pretty good tennis player. And Calvin, we've not really, because she had a bit of a breakthrough, I think, last summer. And I feel like I've not really heard a huge amount about her since then. But yeah,
Summer before.
But yeah, she made her first WTA semi in Bogota this week. She's up to 385 in the world. I mean, has it just been injury? We've just not really seen her out on court, to be honest.
Yeah, Fran's been injured for a while, unfortunately. But Fran's a real competitor. She's a real dog fighter. But yeah, I mean, obviously Fran just wouldn't have got selected, but I think it's a big miss, big risk not selecting British number 2 for all the talk of consistency and that kind of thing. And let's be honest, they're not sure how many matches they won that you wouldn't have expected them to win. It sounded like it was a phenomenal performance last time out. And I've got a lot of time for Anne. I'm certain that she'll have her reasons, but it's not something I would have done. I'd have, if you're going to do that, you better make sure you win the tie. If you're going to leave your, in theory, if you're going to leave your best player out.
Yeah, and I know that she obviously wasn't selected for Glasgow and was widely expected to be selected for that. Because I remember I was in Shrewsbury on the day of selection and wasn't picked for that, which presumably if she had, then we might be a different situation. But surprising to see. But I mean, she'll only take it one way. I think. I mean, you know Jodie much better than I do, Calvin. But she's a bit of a fighter, isn't she?
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be disappointment, but it does get to the stage where you start to get a bit pissed off at it. And look, I'll go the other side of it. I've captained teams, and you don't always select the best players because for various reasons there might be, and it might not be nothing personal. You might just think this is not a good one, but this is a player on the verge of the top 100 and in great form. And it's hard to say that Katie Boulter and Harriet Dart are in great form. I think that's the other thing. You could argue it if say your best available player was in bad form and on the way down, and the others are on the way up. You're choosing not only to not pick your highest ranked available player, but also not pick your most in form available player.
Is there potentially a defence of that the other two have come up with some big match wins in the past? Kind of top ranked players, and that's kind of what they need here. I mean,
I'd question what how big these match wins were. I mean, like we say, Katie Boulter had a good run, and again, look, I've got a lot of time for all the girls who are in that team, and I think they're all good players. But Katie Boulter, her big wins came in 2019. It's 4 years ago. It's like if we're looking at saying, they always turn up for this tournament. It's 4 years ago, and and last time, let's be honest, we got through it because of the doubles. Yeah. We had some decent results because of the doubles. But...
And let's not forget that we got in because we hosted it. Like we didn't qualify.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. That's what miffs me a bit, and we do get in the habit of this particularly with the Billie Jean King Cup team in Britain. We go, but they did so well last time. Like, did they? Like, was it that good? Like when it was in, we like James said, we didn't get in. Then when we somehow got in through the back door, and then we won. Who did we beat? Was it Kazakhstan?
Australia. No, lost to Australia.
To Australia.
Yeah, Kazakhstan. You're right.
Yeah, but beat Kazakhstan. We lost to Spain. Like, we got through on, like, some sort of rubber countback, and Kazakhstan played a terrible doubles team. Like, they completely messed it up, like, with who they... we wouldn't beat the best Kazakhstan team, I know that much. So you're looking at it and go, right, why are we sticking with these players, then?
Just because I was there and I forgot, but we lost to Kazakhstan, but we won the doubles, which was the crucial rubber that we won, having lost to 2 singles games. And then we beat Spain 3-0 to go through. That was how the chips fell. But yes, as you say, I mean, we played 6 rubbers in the group and lost 2 of them, but just about got over the line. And then we're beaten by Australia in a deciding doubles tiebreak, which I suppose is close. I appreciate what you're saying. Like, it's not as though we beat 4 different teams and stormed through to the semi-finals, but
yeah,
I don't know. As you say, if they win the tie, it doesn't matter. If they don't win the tie, then they've got something to prove.
They could get a wild card, couldn't they? After potentially.
This tournament's the most ridiculous tournament ever. They could just offer to host it again. Like, it just makes
that is probably what will happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same in the Davis Cups now. It's getting that way, isn't it? It's like, what's the point in having these knockout qualifiers where even if you get knocked out, you could probably still play if you've got a good team.
Just because we're running short on time, I've got another couple of just like WCA quick hits to mention. Garbine Muguruza says she's taking a break until the summer and will miss the French Open and Wimbledon. She hasn't won a match since September last year and said this week that spending time with friends and family and it's been really healthy and amazing, so I'm going to lengthen this period. Good luck to her. There was some really painful social media posts from her saying that she'd really lost her way and didn't know how to win anymore. Ons Jabeur, meanwhile, quite the opposite. She won the title in Charleston this week. On clay, she beat Daria Kasatkina and then Belinda Bencic in the final without dropping a set as well. So she's clearly refound some of her best form ahead of what could be a very big swing for her. And Alina Svitolina made her comeback from pregnancy also in Charleston. She lost 6-7, 6-2, 6-4 to Yulia Putintseva in a match that lasted nearly 3 hours. She said, I had goosebumps. It was a really, really sweet atmosphere out there. It was so nice to see so many people, and they were cheering me on to push through some tough moments. Elsewhere, Francis Tiafoe winning the second title of his career in Houston, the tournament of which we've heard so much, mostly about rain, as well as gutting doubles finals results. And Casper Ruud also won a title in Estoril. You will not be surprised to hear, given its Casper Ruud title, that it was a 250 and it was on clay, because that represents 9 of his now 10 career titles. He beat João Sousa, Baez, Alice, and then Maimir Kecmanovic en route. Calvin, you already kind of mentioned that group doesn't fill you with any particular confidence. George, do you give Casper Ruud any more credit than Calvin has for that run?
I give him credit because he wasn't winning anything before that. So, confidence is bred by victories, and the lad's got a lot of points to defend coming up that are going to be pretty tough for him to defend. So that was a good start to the clay season for him, and he's someone who can do damage on this surface. He's got a big booming forehand. His ball arc suits the clay quite well. So yeah, I think it's good to have him back in the mix, even if I think it's very hard to see him reaching the final again this year.
Calvin, do you give him any chance of getting back to a final in the French Open?
Rude? No, he's no chance.
I mean, that is pretty remarkable. Like, I know we have talked about Casper Ruud a lot before, but that is pretty remarkable when you consider he reached 2 Grand Slam finals and was 1 win away from world number 1 last year. It's pretty wild.
But then what's his third best slam result? Isn't it his second round or something?
That's a superb question, but yeah, it is something. I think he might have made a quarter-final somewhere in the past. No, yeah, you're right. It's 4th round of the Australian Open is his 3rd best slam result. But people are allowed to make breakthroughs. Like, what's Carlos Alcaraz's 3rd best slam result? It's probably not much better, right?
Carlos Alcaraz still at school. Casper Ruud's like 24 or 25, isn't he?
Yeah, fair point. I was chatting to Ryan Penniston this week for a piece that I'm writing and talking about that match when he beat him, and he was sort of trying. Ryan's a really nice guy. Calvin obviously knows him, and he was trying not to say that he fancied it when he drew him, but I sort of got the impression that he looked at it and thought, this is quite nerve-wracking, but the bloke doesn't know what he's doing on grass, and so it proved. Right, let's move on again, because there are other title winners to mention. Bogota Tatiana Maria, a great story from Wimbledon last year. She picked up the title. We've already mentioned Fran Jones making the semis. Roberto Carballes Baena won a title in Marrakesh, and I think that might be the first time I've mentioned Roberto Carballes Baena on the podcast when he's not the B-side of a match, so that's exciting for him. I'm sure he'll be delighted. And finally, and I don't know whether this is something we're going to be able to squeeze into the last 10 minutes before George has to run off to some other important engagement. But I thought we've been kind of reticent to talk about this, not for any particular reason, just because it's a big topic to get into. But this is Tennis Unfiltered, and we should unfilter and try sometimes. The jumping off point is the story that you may have seen over this week, where Nike ran a campaign in which they paid a woman called Dylan Mulvaney, who is a trans woman and an influencer, to model one of the brand's new sports bras on social media. And as you can imagine, it sparked significant backlash, as literally everything involving trans people does at the moment. This is kind of in the context that there was also news last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, that World Athletics have banned trans women from elite female events. A move that's been kind of copied further down the pyramid in the UK, and presumably in other parts of the world. Increasingly, it sort of feels like trans women are being excluded from elite sport, and people have views on that. The kind of blowback from that is that the people who don't think trans women should be involved in elite sports say that their inclusion excludes what they would call real women from elite sport, and there's been a campaign to boycott Nike because of it, led by the likes of Sharon Davis and Mario Mucci and a few others, and Martina Navratilova, who has also kind of been involved with it. She's retweeted a few tweets. I can read out some of them. One of her retweets read, "Women are not a parody, caricature, or stereotype companies, and those of you disrespectful enough not to understand that will lose customers. Hashtag Nike hates women. Hashtag trans women are con men. Hashtag boycott Nike women." That was something that Martina retweeted. She also retweeted one that described Dylan Mulvaney as a biological male prancing around in a bra and pretending to be a woman. Another that called her a limp-wristed man who's never done a day's sport in their life. George, the tweet you kind of brought this to everyone's attention with in planning was from AJ Eccles, a tennis writer, who said, "Next time Martina Navratilova tries to say she's just protecting women's sport, remember the straight-up hate speech she is more than willing to share about how she really feels about trans women. This is not reasonable debate. This is hatred." George, I know you've obviously done work around this, and I'm not going to pose a specific question. Maybe just give you the chance to give us a bit of reaction to that, and maybe your thoughts on the rights and wrongs of it.
Yeah, I mean, so zooming out on the kind of the trans issue as a whole, I mean, this is a debate that, in my view, gets far too much airtime given kind of the proportion of people involved. I think it's an important issue for kind of the minority itself, and they deserve the right to kind of live their lives entirely as they should. It's just such a disingenuous debate from so many people who really want to air it. That's my kind of first overarching comment. And it, to be perfectly honest, there are people out there who want to stoke this debate for their own political means. I don't think that's overly controversial to say. Having said that, I think the area of debate where it's the most difficult, or one of the most difficult, is around women's sport. And it's very difficult for me as a kind of a white man to sit around and say, it's fine for kind of biological males to compete in women's sport. There's a lot of kind of grey areas in that argument. I'm kind of broadly for it, but I understand the kind of difficulties with this conversation. What I don't like at all, and you've read some of those quotes there, is where it strays well beyond that debate. And, there are kind of arguments to be had about protecting women's sport. And, there's all sorts of kind of... I'm reading a book at the minute actually called the Data Gap around kind of women. I can't remember the title of the book, so I'm absolutely terrible at titles. But, there's all sorts of things about how the world's kind of designed for kind of 5'10" men, basically. And, it puts women's rights at risk, and there's not even disaggregated data collected about women, full stop. So, this is an actual serious issue that we're not kind of actually making the world a better place for women to live in. So I really find it very difficult for me to weigh in and say, this part of their sport, we should make these changes, etc. But at the same time, trans people are horrendously persecuted, and some of the abuse that goes their way is absolutely horrendous. So calling them a limp-wristed man, hashtag trans women are con men, I just hate it. I really, really hate it. I think it's horrible. And you really, I doubt Martina Navratilova is listening to this, but if you are, you think about some of the things you faced in your career coming up. This is the same thing you're doing to a very, very vulnerable group of people, and you should be ashamed of yourself, to be honest. So that's my unfiltered view, James.
It's that James Acaster bit that he does in his stand-up where he talks about edgy comedians and how their defence is they're holding people to account. And he makes the point that, because who's really gone without any checks and balances? The trans community. They really need to be reined in. I mean, Calvin, to kind of take a tennis view on this, because I appreciate this isn't an issue that really has... It's been made a tennis issue just because Martina Navratilova was involved, but do you think this is something that people do talk about in tennis, and that people... I know some people in women's sport are worried about, trans women getting involved in women's sport and ruining women's sport, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's getting talked about more and more, I think. And I said in our WhatsApp group the other day, it's just such a massive can of worms. And the difficulty I find with it, and I won't pretend to be overly educated on it, is that no matter which position you take, and everybody seems to have or most people seem to have a very, very definite position on it, you're going to end up offending some person who is generally a reasonable person. I know, as George says, that the trans community are treated terribly in this world. They don't deserve to be offended anymore. But I also know, that women in general are treated pretty poorly as well. And I know that, educated, intelligent people who I respect are absolutely fuming about the trans situation because women, because they don't think that they should be allowed to play in the sport. And it's just so difficult to deal with. And I don't think what doesn't help is just idiots getting involved like we're seeing on TV, and this nonsense of every time Keir Starmer's on LBC, somebody asks him, "Do you know what a female is?" Which is just the most pointless question I've ever heard. And that everyone's always trying to ramp it up with some edge or something. And as George says, it is something that affects so few people that I don't get how they get so wound up about it. But as George made numerous excellent points. Change for George there. For the one person who you would think would have had more sympathy on this, who wouldn't have behaved like an absolute idiot, is Martina Navratilova, for what she had to come through in the 1980s as well, which is, it would have been worse than it is now. But again, and obviously Martina Navratilova is a gay female, and I found a lot. That's where I've been disappointed, because obviously I work in tennis, so I happen to know a lot of gay female players, because there were in the 1990s there was a large community of that. It's less so now, but they've all sort of taken the same position, and I've been pretty disappointed in a lot of them, to be fair, the position that they've taken.
Yeah, I mean, just on kind of the broader women point in society as a whole, the majority of violence against women is for men, not for kind of trans men. It is just something that's kind of being lobbed into this tiny, small community when there's so much broader societal problems on that perspective. So, yeah, it is an issue that winds me up a little bit. As I say, I'm not taking a strong position from a sporting stance, but I think it just needs to be dealt with, held at a much more reasonable level of debate, rather than this horrible arena we've emerged into on our podcast this week.
Yeah, and I think actually, just because I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're not trying to minimise the issue when we say that it's being made into a much larger issue than it is. Yeah. For a very small group of people, it's an enormous issue. But I think the idea that there are, huge numbers of trans women desperately chomping at the bit to play professional tennis and dominate the top 20 or win every Olympic medal is a falsehood. And I think it's a useful straw man argument for a lot of people who don't like trans people to make this a bit like the immigration argument. It's a nice argument to make this argument that there are more people than there are, and make the threat seem a bit bigger. The boogeyman is scary, Calvin.
Yeah, it is. I've had this argument on the big, not just about sport, with friends of mine. I live in Barnsley, which, to be honest, it's not we don't have much in the trans community here. And one of my mates was ranting about it. He obviously reads the Daily Mail and that kind of thing. He was ranting about it, and I pointed out that he's a 42-year-old man and lived in Barnsley his entire life. How many trans people have you actually ever come across? And it's like, it's amazing how many people can get so het up about it. But I also was hearing the other day, and I don't know what the situation is, but there's this one that goes around that males can just decide to play in a female sport if which is just an absolute nonsense, isn't it? Well, yeah. I learned in the last week that's it. Apparently there's the swimmer that was obviously on a bit of dodgy ground there, but that was because of some strange college rules, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember her name, and it's gone out of my head.
Thomas, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to wade in on it, but yes, exactly. The main point you're making, Calvin, is correct. That you can't just wake up tomorrow, and I hate it. It's so Piers Morgan. You can't just wake up tomorrow and say you're a woman and then go and enter the blooming French Open like that. I mean, that just is just not how it works. Like, trans women have to jump through an enormous number of hoops for almost anything. Just talk about the Gender Recognition Act that's just been passed in Scotland that might well be revoked because of a change in European or UK law. That it's incredibly disappointing that we can't use sport as an opportunity to champion these people a bit and give them a voice and that kind of thing. And actually, and maybe this is the last thing I'll say on it, I spoke to someone the other day who is a trans woman and plays football in a trans team, a group of trans women who wanted to play together, and she was telling me that this will impact grassroots sport, and the fact that elite trans women are now being banned from female events will stop trans women getting involved in sport, and that's a bad thing. Like, at the heart of all of this, everything comes back to this. Whenever we have any conversation about tennis growing or about any sport growing, what we want is more people playing sport, because playing sport is good for you. Like, the science behind that is irrefutable. It's even a flat earther couldn't tell you that sport is on the whole bad for you. So if you're going to restrict people and do things that are actively stopping people and preventing them playing sport, I have to see that as a bad thing. And I don't know if anyone has anything else to say on it. Because
it's a good monologue. I enjoyed it.
One final slightly tongue-in-cheek comment is that the question Calvin alluded to earlier about defining a female, I used to pull my hair out with this sort of question when I was asked to define a cat at university. When I was in my philosophy.
Why were you asked? Didn't you do geography?
No, I did philosophy. No,
right, okay.
But it's always a great question that you've got a cat. At what point is it not a cat? How do you describe it? It's got
this is Plato, isn't it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is Plato.
A bit of metaphysics we go into. So how much can you chop off the cat before it stops them becoming a cat? These sort of questions are very difficult to actually answer philosophically. So anyone who actually has a perfect answer for what a female is, I think, deserves a Nobel Prize for being able to define anything properly.
And Nick Ferrari is not that man. This is the main problem. It's kind of. I was reading about something the other day, like Alison Hammond got herself in trouble for something that she said about theatre performance, and it's just like the pundit culture where people's size of reputation is not based on their expertise on a topic, but just on their popularity and charisma, means that debate about almost anything that becomes vaguely in vogue is completely nonsensical, because it's usually being had by Piers Morgan and some other bloody journalist. And I'm a journalist. We know cool. We don't know things. We just hear things that people tell us and try and combine them, and then we hope to put them in front of people so they can make their own minds up. But the idea that journalists and commentators and people who just put commentator in their Twitter bios should be having these big debates in a public forum drives me completely insane.
I think it's even beyond that. Even in sport, I watched about 10 minutes of football the other day. On the Monday Night Football the other day, of that. I'm having a serious discussion about who would you have playing up front for Man United next week, Wout Weghorst, or next season, Wout Weghorst or Cristiano Ronaldo. And Jamie Carragher was just repeatedly saying to Gary Neville, "Which one? Tell us which one." And it's neither of them are playing up front for Man United next year, are they? What's the point in having this discussion? And it went on for about 5 minutes. Then Dave Jones started weighing in. Come on, Gary, which one? Which one will it be? It's this is just ridiculous. It's the worst television I've watched in years.
The death of proper analysis.
No, it's the need. I think it's the need to. It's the kind of it's the gotcha argument again, isn't it? Gotcha journalism, they call it, and trying to make bold statements all the time.
Yeah, agreed. But then we are Tennis Unfiltered, and we try and make bold statements, but we do it without being disingenuous, I like to think. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for joining us, Calvin and George, fighting through the Midlands to be here. As always, please leave us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcast. Tell your friends about Tennis Unfiltered, and most importantly, please come back next week.
Social Podcast Network.